everyone, welcome. We're happy you're here. In this episode, we are going to read Volume 2, Chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 is told by Adachi. She's trying to gather enough courage to ask Shimamura out on Christmas, but ends up being a pillow instead. Chapter 3 is told by Shimamura. Adachi finally asks her dream girl, Wadasha! Would Shimamura give that sweet, sure, why not? Or draw her sword and cut Adachi's heart in half with a, no, sorry. 2 chapters in one show. We do it all for you, our faithful listeners. Before we begin, I want to do a special shout out to this week's sponsor, Nagafuji's Meat. If you're like me, chances are you're too busy thinking about your only friend's boobs that you forgot to flip the okonomiyaki again for the second time. But who needs mad spatula skills when you can come down to Nagafuji Meat Shop and order some freshly made croquettes? In fact, on my way here, I pick up a dozen. My personal favorite is the chicken curry croquette. It's crispy on the outside, and inside it has a creamy, spicy red curry sauce mixed with bits of chicken that slaps your taste buds wide awake when you bite into it. Oh, shit! These croquettes are out of this world! It's your destiny to save some for us! Oh, there's our director. Right, fine. Big thanks to our sponsor, Nagafuji Meats. Now, let me introduce you to the reading crew. The sick background beats are mixed and provided by DJ Rocket Fingers Yudachi. Adachi Sakura is voiced by the calm and cool Val. Shimamura Hougetsu is voiced by Naga. Fuji. Shimamura Yoshika and other side characters will be voiced by server's resident Miku worshipper, Rebel Miku. Nagafuji Taeko is voiced by esteemed poutine enthusiast, NeoArashi. The roll-up switch will be handled by our adorable understudy, Kyo. Don't forget to say hi to her afterwards. Lastly, Hino Akira will be voiced by me, your favorite gay disaster. Finger guns. Pew, pew. Alright, don't forget to grab some tasty Nagafuji meat croquettes and get cozy with your number one friend. It's time to add the Shima and chill.
Chapter 2 Adachi's Gift. Will it be weird for me to go out with Shimamura on Christmas? The finals were rapidly closing in, yet that was all I could think about. Propping up my chin with my hand, I restlessly moved my feet around, trying to keep them warm because the air conditioner sure wasn't. Eventually, I gave up on the pretense of studying, closed the reference book I'd barely even opened, and rolled into my bed. I turned to my side and was immediately dazzled. The ceiling lights were far brighter than I had anticipated. The bulbs had just been changed, and as such, were still extremely powerful. I turned over again, this time toward the window, and rubbed my cheek. It felt a bit dry. I'd been in my room for a while now, which was probably why. The air conditioner certainly didn't help either. Honestly, it seemed pretty tempting to just fall asleep. It was the first Tuesday of December, and the final exams for the second term were going to be starting at the beginning of the next week. Combine that with the cold weather, and it was easy to see why this was the part of the year when our expressions were at their sternest. And before anyone asked, no, you couldn't just skip the exam. Speaking of winter, the second floor of the gym had been getting pretty chilly as well lately, particularly the floor. It was so cold now that stepping on it barefoot caused me to instantly jump up. It came as no surprise, and my feet really took me there these days. Yeah, the gym was Shimamura and my hiding place from spring to autumn. The question was, where should we go now that it's winter? Those thoughts led me to worry about Christmas. While there was certainly all sorts of holidays and festivals and what have you, as for those where it was acceptable or common for girls to get together and have a grand old time, not so many. To be precise, it wasn't the having a grand old time that was the problem. No, simply getting together made you look weird. Shimamura and I obviously didn't have our own special date or anything like that. For making one of those, I had to admit it, Christmas did seem like the bad choice. There was something slightly off about New Year's, and making a big deal about giving her chocolate as a friend on Valentine's Day seemed a little strange as well. Could I even do that in the first place? Give Shimamura chocolate? It wasn't difficult for me to imagine myself getting all self-conscious and just forcing the box into her hands, leading to an awkward silence between us. I also felt bad preemptively for making her go buy me a box of her own, because knowing Shimamura, there was no way that she would prepare one beforehand. I told her that it was fine, that she didn't have to, but she'd go anyway. That's just how she was. As there was no stop to the headaches surrounding Valentine's Day, I decided to leave it all behind and instead imagine us meeting on Christmas and going out together. It didn't take long for me to realize that I had no idea what that would entail. However, it was always super cold on Christmas, and as the winter break meant that there was no school, I barely went outside. Were there a lot of girls having fun together? Very few? I simply didn't know. I had to fill in the blanks, from the downscape to our frosty breaths, using my imagination. When I was feeling weak, the sorts of thoughts caused me to get depressed, like I was weird for having them. On the contrary, when my mind was free of worries, I found them completely normal. That was to say, I wasn't able to find a good balance, and instead continued bouncing back and forth between the two extremes. This struggle was quite exhausting, honestly, and quite frequently manifests itself as a migraine. For these past few days, I've been trying my hardest to decide whether or not I should ask her. Yet another night spent with this endless conflict raging in my head. Lying though was, strangely enough, really starting to irritate me, and I returned to the chair. I opened up the book and randomly flipped through the pages. The book didn't have the answers. I opened up the closed reference book and randomly flipped through the pages, barely even looking at them. The book didn't have the answers I was looking for, nor the droids. Even if it did, I probably wouldn't have wanted to follow them.
Am I just being too self conscious?
I wondered out loud. I'd been thinking about this way too much, and by the end, I was left feeling like I wasn't able to get down a tree that I'd climbed up myself. It wasn't really as difficult as I was making it out to be, and I just casually asked her, I'd get an answer. So simple, or at least I hope so. Going out with her during a holiday itself wasn't the problem. No, what made it troublesome was that I was asking her specifically on Christmas. The essential question was this: will Shimamura think that I was weird? Or simply not her head? Focusing my attention on that question, I found myself worried, unable to decide what I should do. I went ahead and wrote Shimamura in the corner of the book. As always, a word reminder of the store. Come to think of it, what was her first name again? Shimamura was definitely a person without much of a presence, to the point that she often joked about how she came close to forgetting it herself all the time. She didn't have any friends who called her by her first name, huh? In that case, what if I started doing it? Yes, me. Perhaps that was the kind of a special relationship I was looking for. At the same time, though, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't imagine myself calling her anything other than Shimamura. I just felt like it'd be a whole other person if our relationship ever grew that deep. Shimamura is Shimamura. I read in my head as I stared at the name I'd written out. That didn't last for long, however. Staring at it caused me to face just how conscious I was of her. I got really embarrassed and quickly erased the name, or tried to do so, at least, because no matter how hard I rubbed the eraser against the paper, I couldn't make the text disappear completely. Had I just too much strength while writing it? It was kinda similar to when I closed my eyes, fell asleep, and woke up, only to find that the image of her from the previous day was still fresh in my mind. If Shimamura were to start making requests to me, what would be the point where I'd no longer say yes? For example, what if she asked, hold my back, Adachi? No, that wasn't the kind of question I was thinking of. Something more akin to, give me a hug. In that case, yeah, I probably would. What about going shopping with her? I'd be delighted. Joining her for an afternoon nap? No, that wasn't it either. These were all the things I wanted her to ask me, not something that she'd actually ever say. I was in class, yet Shimamura had once again found her way into my mind. I liked about her more than she did herself. That didn't mean that I understood her, however, because I certainly didn't. It was kinda like how walking around a lake didn't mean that you knew how cold the water was, or what sort of creatures live in it. This was how attempting to socialize usually went for me. I'd overthink things and find myself stuck, unable to move forward. Then, incapable of doing anything, I'd watch the whole thing crash down a burn in front of my eyes. I was well aware that both my parents thought of me as a child who they weren't able to understand, though it had never been my intention to hide whether I was happy or not. For whatever reason, it didn't seem that those two were able to tell. A lapse in communication, maybe? I honestly had no idea. I'd even tried mimicking those around me, but to no avail. Perhaps we just weren't compatible with each other, me and my family? As it turned out, blood wasn't much. of a link. Mine at least was merely a liquid, unable to maintain its shape, and thus incapable of tying people together. It was no wonder that I had grown distant from my family. That wasn't the case with Shimamura, however. No, not at all. I'm a little embarrassed to say, but with her, I found myself worrying that I was too easy to read, and yet she didn't seem to take any notice. The only reason I could think of was that she really didn't mind. On one hand, I found it relieving, but on the other, it just led me to more worries. Our relationship wasn't equal, not in the slightest. No matter how you look at it, it was clear that I was the far more conscientious one. For example, whereas I regularly called her Shimamura, I always stuck to the text messages. I felt like this really showed off our personalities, our attitudes. I didn't like the appearance of blank time that came with messaging when you were waiting for the other person to write their reply. They irritated me and made me nervous. Talking to someone over the phone was just so much easier. Well, I obviously couldn't call her in the middle of class. Yes, I was in the classroom, and so was Shimamura. We are relatively close to each other, but not close enough to talk. No, we were limited to fleeting glances. Not that our eyes even met all that often. I was a little surprised how diligently Shimamura was attending the class. What did that make me then? Propping up my head with my hand, I cast my eyes downwards and sighed. With all sorts of thoughts running through my mind, the class came to an end, and at this point, I had completely given up on passing the damn exam. School had already ended when I at last met. I hadn't talked with Shimamura today, not even during the lunch break. I hadn't had an opportunity to do so yesterday either, meaning that it had now been 2 days in a row that I hadn't heard her voice. I felt like my ears were going to start crying. Well, hopefully not. Just imagining a strange fluid gushing out from my ears was pretty disgusting. I stuffed the unopened textbooks into my bag and got up out of my seat. As usual, it took just a slight bit of courage to go where Shimamura was. While I might not have had anything to be ashamed of, there was still something about walking up to her somewhere people could see us that made me feel reluctant to do so. Was my excessive self-consciousness the reason why? In mere seconds, I'd blown through a whole day's worth of saved-up courage. Any attempts to create a worldwide stockpile of it would be completely futile as long as I kept doing this. But still, even if the fact that I needed to do so in the first place was a bit problematic, at least this was a healthy use of my courage. That I was convinced of. But as I approached Shimamura's seat, I could see Hino and Nagafuji walking up to her as well. Seeing them caused me to take an instant step backwards, resulting in me not being able to be the first one to talk to her.
It's finally winter! Now I can wear muffler without looking like a weirdo!
Hino stated.
What are you even talking about?
Shimamura asked back, tilting her head. Couldn't remember Hino ever wearing a muffler. The ones who did were Shimamura and I. Just as many strange remarks as always. And as us wearing a muffler apparently, I see.
Have you been studying for the exam, Shimako?
What about you, Hino? And everyone else?
Do you even need to ask them?
For some unknown reason, she was looking really proud of herself with her arms folded. Also, why wouldn't she need to ask us?
By the way, what are grades?
Half of the time, I don't know if you're joking or not.
Shimamura replied to Nagafuji's question, clearly amazed. She muttered back ambiguously, the expression on her face giving the appearance that she was deep in thought. No kidding, you really couldn't tell whether she was joking or serious. Not too long after, she took off her glasses and wiped her eyes.
So, you needed something from me?
Nope, not really. Is that a bad thing?
Hino asked, still acting all self-important. Shimamura placed her back on the desk and looked up to her.
I wonder.
Definitely.
Nagafuji nodded. Instantly, having clearly not given it even a second thought, Shimamura gave her a forced smile, but avoided making eye contact, almost as if there was still something that bugged her. She did seem like the kind of person who didn't talk to others unless she needed something. Was that perhaps the reason why?
Well then, let's come up with something. Oh, I know. I could say goodbye to you before you leave school. You did that in elementary school, right?
Yeah, I did. The teacher would say goodbye to all the students.
Shimamura's eyes grew narrow as she looked back on her days in elementary school. She even waved her hand slightly. Hino waved back at her before turning towards me. She took a step forward and stared at my face real close.
Yo! Adachi! Have you been studying?
Once again, a new nickname. I bet she came up with them on the spot.
I guess.
Oh, really? How diligent.
Shimamura stayed while stuffing her books into her bag, clearly surprised. Apparently, she thought that I'd given up from the start and hadn't been doing anything. Like what? But, well, figured.
Good, good. Maybe I should follow your example.
Yeah! Why aren't you studying?
Hino jumped up and lightly tapped Nagafuji's head. As the head difference between the two was vast, it was only thanks to the latter bending her knees in response that she was able to do so. How strange. Anyway, from the looks of it, the two appeared to be just about to leave. It seemed like they really hadn't wanted anything from Shimamura. I sighed in relief.
All right, Nagafuji, do you mind if I come over?
I feel like I see you every day near the kotatsu.
That's just your imagination. Imagination.
I still kinda feel that way.
Don't. No more, right?
Nope. So, in other words, what I saw was...
Continuing the ridiculous conversation, the two left the classroom. While my relationship with them was still by no means deep, At this point, I could more or less grasp their personalities. Hino was just as sociable as she looked, and as for Nagafuji, well, let's just say that you shouldn't trust her intellectual appearance. Still, those two sure did get along, huh? I'd only ever seen them together. It was kinda like how most of the time, Shimamura was the only person I was with, except much more frequent. Plus, Shimamura did hang out with other people. Sometimes, when I thought about that fact, I couldn't I could feel my throat narrowing, like there was something stuck in there. The two left, and Shimamura's gaze turned towards me.
Now, what do you want? No, sorry.
She scratched her forehead, taking back her words. The earlier exchange seemed to have put her on slightly on the edge. She grabbed her bag and stood up.
What's wrong? There I go again. I wonder how I should greet people in situations like these.
Rewrapping her muffler around her neck, Shimamura knit her eyebrows. Was something troubling her?
Any ideas, Adachi?
Don't ask me.
From what I could gather, the problem here seemed to be that she didn't think it was proper to simply ask, "What's wrong?" when someone walked up to you. Personally, I didn't mind that. Rather, I felt relieved when I didn't need to be the one to start the conversation.
Let's just leave that question for the next time. Now, what was it, Adachi?
It seemed that matter had been put on a shelf. At least, we were getting to the main topic. Still, I wonder why did I always start to hesitate when it came time to ask her? The answer was simple. I was scared that she would say no. Yeah, that was probably it. I hate the idea of her thinking negatively of me.
I was thinking, why don't we go study for the exams together?
Huh? Study?
Judging by Shimamura's expression, that wasn't what she had been expecting me to say. While it was true that I was a delinquent who barely went to class, in a weird way, that turned out to be the greatest impetus for studying before an exam. In other words, there was no way that I could invite her to have fun.
When did you become a grade A student, Adachi?
Oh, come on. Everyone studies before an exam. It's completely normal.
I wonder, is it due to my influence?
While the innocent grin on her face showed that she meant that statement as a joke, she was actually spot on. I wouldn't have been in the classroom had I not met her. Not today, and not any other day. I wanted to thank her, but feeling that it would cause her to look at me weird, I decided against it.
Well, in that case, you should also ask Hino and Nagafuji.
Huh?
They might not look like it, but those two get better grades than we ever will.
Shimamura's eyes turned towards the classroom's entrance as she said that. I got the feeling that if I wasn't careful, she'd run after them. The reason I didn't want them to join us was quite simple. I wanted to be alone with Shimamura. A part of me wanted to say that to her directly, but thankfully, I managed to stop myself in time. My eyes jumping from place to place, I looked for an alternative excuse.
Those two are super diligent students. If their grades really are that good, then studying with isn't going to help us in any way.
Oh, you think I'm an idiot, Adachi? Is that what you're saying?
Huh?
Shimamura suddenly pointed her finger at me in a really childish way. It kinda made me laugh.
Considering that my grades are the same as yours, I'd say that it's just the right amount of stupid.
Huh? No, that's not what I...
Wait. Was I being inadvertently treated like an idiot?
Still, you are completely right. All right, let's study together.
Before I had a chance to think about it for longer than a second, the question was wiped out of relevancy by Shimamura's reply. I could feel something simmering near the back of my neck. Bubbles of help, perhaps?
Where should we do it? There's a library pretty close by. Oh, I guess we have one of those in school too, huh?
No, that isn't. In my mind, I rejected Shimamura's suggestion. Somewhere people couldn't see us. Somewhere we could be alone. That was what I wanted.
Why don't we go over to your place?
Huh? It's so dusty there.
She didn't sound all that enthusiastic about it. Also, dusty? I wasn't sure about that. I found myself physically uncomfortable as I thought about the time I'd been there. Now I had to run away with my face bright red. While Shimamura didn't seem to have thought much about it, looking at it objectively, it had been ultra suspicious. I could only thank my luck that I hadn't been hit by a car or something on my way back home.
What about your place?
Mine?
I'd been about to use some reasonable argument to turn down her suggestion, like how I lived really far away and felt bad about making her walk back home, when I remembered that I still had the can I'd brought back with me from the park. If she were to realize that it had been the same one from back then, I'd once again have to rush out, this time from my own home. Obviously, there was no way I could let that happen.
Well, that's kinda... you know...
Oh, I just realized it might be a little awkward for me as well.
She muttered before turning away, sounding like she'd just realized something. I let out a short, questioning ground, but she ignored it.
I guess we can go to my place, but I warn you, it is really dusty there.
She repeated. Strange. Her home didn't seem all that old to me. I exited the classroom alongside her. It wasn't something we had done in all that many times, and as such, I wasn't quite used to it. We had just passed through the door and entered the corridor when I felt a sensation in my shoulder, almost like I was being stopped in place by a thin, invisible membrane. I could only assume that feeling was caused by my excessively self-conscious reaction to what was happening. To put it simply, I was nervous. Though I hadn't done so on purpose, I'd ended up on Shimamura's left side. That was to say, on the opposite side of her right hand, which she held her bag. I glanced at her hand and saw it swinging leisurely from side to side. Her other hand was empty, and for a second, mine reached for it. I quickly pulled back, however. I took a look around. We were in school, in the hallway. Our classmates were everywhere. Shimamura might have been who she was, but even she'd turn me down if I tried doing it here. Probably shake her hand free or something. I had to force myself to look at it from her perspective. Shimamura wasn't kind. No. There was something else to it. Something slightly different. Yeah. There was no way we could talk hand in hand. I straightened my back and began walking, forcing myself to move on. With Shimamura behind me, I pedaled over to her house. The sun had started setting earlier day by day, and it was now completely dim outside, as if the whole world was lit by a single forlorn garden lantern. It really seemed like it would be pitch black by the time I went home. Speaking of which, how long was I going to stay for? What would be a normal amount of time? I hadn't been to a friend's house once after entering high school, and such things were completely beyond me. It was common for these sort of matters to grow into problems between us, Shimamura and I. Even I knew what it meant to be normal friends. I didn't want us to be normal, however, but rather special friends. What sort of a baseline would that set? I didn't have the faintest clue. Unable to see my feet, I'd mistake carelessness for courage and step forward, accidentally getting too close. The result of that would be me working myself up for no particular reasons, ultimately ending in a wadasha. The fact that I knew this wasn't, I wasn't able to do anything about it was pretty serious, almost like an illness.
Whoa! She's home!
A stern frown formed on Shimamura's face as she peered through the gap between her house and the garage next to it. I peeked from behind her and saw an orange frame parked there. This seemed to be the bike her mother rode. I remember hearing Shimamura talk about how that was the reason why she walked to school.
I'm home!
She said as she knocked on the door. A little while later, I hear her first step approaching on the other side. The lock turned, the door opened, and a person appeared. That person was Shimamura's mom. Her hair was slightly wet and her skin red. Had she taken a bath?
Welcome back. Oh, a friend? Are you sure real? Oh, the house.
Shimamura's mom was astonished not once, but twice, and back to back at that. The first time I could understand, but the second? I was a little confused. Was it that her daughter had brought a friend to her house? Either way, Shimamura silently walked past and took her shoes off. From the look on her face, I could tell that she was displeased.
We're going to be studying. Please don't bother us.
Adachi, was it?
Her mom asked me, pretty much ignoring her daughter. I nodded slightly and placed my shoes next to Shimamura. Her expression grew more sullen by the second, and for a moment I found myself staring at it. Quite a rare sight. She hardly ever showed this sort of negative emotion on her face. Most likely it was reserved for when she was dealing with her family. Yeah, even with Shimamura, there was just something special about family. Must be nice, both for her family to have someone like her, and for her to have a family like hers.
Come on! Just go already!
I thought you were past your rebellious phase.
Feeling slightly ignored by Shimamura talking to her mom, I looked around. Deeper in, I saw Shimamura's little sister poking her head out from one of the rooms. She was looking our way, our eyes met, and she instantly withdrew. Based on what Shimamura had told me, she was supposed to be a real mischief maker, though she didn't really seem that way. Rather, it looked like she was the type that was scared of new people. Come to think of it, that was how I acted too when meeting a relative, wasn't it? Was her little sister also called Shimamura? By her friend at school? I wonder.
Hey! Let's go! Shoo! Shoo!
Shooing off her mom with her hands, Shimamura climbed up the stairs and left the hallway. I followed her and... Wait. What? Wasn't a room supposed to be on the first floor? I stopped and tilted my head, but as Shimamura beckoned me forward, I decided to leave worrying about it for later. We reached the top of the slightly steep stair, after which I was guided through a narrow hallway to a room at the end of it. It didn't take a second after we entered for me to notice just how dry the hair was. The particle of dust dancing in the air also caught my attention. Shimamura had entered the room before me, and while coughing slightly, she pulled a cord that turned the light on. They flickered twice, after which the room was filled with light. What emerged from the darkness was a random assortment of furniture and worn-out cardboard boxes. There was some leather chair in the corner of the room, though they were torn all over and clearly missing a few screws. A dusty curtain hung in front of the window, blocking the sun and making the room far colder than the hallway. It was easy to tell that this was a storeroom that had been hastily turned into a personal room by adding a kotatsu and a fan. Likewise, the reason why this had been done so was easy to deduce: to allow Shimamura to study till late at night.
Told you it would be dusty.
Shimamura tossed her bag on the floor and flipped the kotatsu on. Instantaneously, I could hear the heat source inside it become active. I watched her crawl under it before sitting the opposite of her.
Should I bring you a cushion to sit on?
No, it's fine.
The carpetless floor definitely felt cold against my feet, but as I didn't want to bother her, I simply waved off her offer. There was a blue coat, a henten, fold next to the kotatsu. As I picked it up, Shimamura's eye turned toward me.
Gotta have one of these. While the kotatsu might warm your legs, it doesn't do anything for your back.
I see.
Anyway, I'm gonna rest till I've gotten warm.
She said before lying down and slipping deeper under the kotatsu. Was it really okay to lie down with her school uniform on? I placed my bag in a pillow next to me and stared at her. What should I do here? I didn't really feel like flipping open the textbook by myself, but at the same time, the kotatsu was way too small for the both of us to lie under. Even now, our feet were almost touching. Still, this room wasn't this room exactly what I wanted. The dusty hair, cramped size made it seem like a hidden room, the random boxes and pieces of furniture lying everywhere. The silence, it was all perfect. The kotatsu hadn't yet warmed up, and still, shivering under it, I found myself thinking about how nice it would be if I could turn this into our winter hideout, so to speak.
Adachi, are you the type of person who listens to music when they study?
Shimamura asked me, not bothering to lift her head. I thought about it for a while before answering.
Yeah, I usually do.
It wasn't something that I had ever thought about, but looking back to it, I did seem to do that often. Take yesterday, for example. I'd been studying to the sound of music. Well, more accurately, I'd opened the textbook and spent 30 minutes stressing about Christmas, only stopping when my head started to hurt. Regardless, with barely any change in her expression, Shimamura gave my answer a small nod.
I see. Well, I guess that makes sense. It's pretty common after all.
Is it really? I'm not sure.
Our reactions were growing more disinterested with each one. As it tended to happen with us, we were quickly sinking into the ocean of silence. However, today, I decided to try holding out just a little bit.
What sort of child were you, Shimamura?
I asked, casually changing the topic into one I'd been thinking about since yesterday. As we normally didn't have anything to talk about, I decided to come up with some.
Let's see. Normal, I guess. Not all that much different compared to how I am right now, I don't think.
She spoke quite quickly, implying that this hasn't been a difficult question for her. I tried imagining what she'd look like if she was herself, but smaller. Small Shimamura. I got as far as imagining myself leading her by the hand before realizing that My version didn't match reality at all. If anything, it was a complete opposite.
I never took part in any of the activities during sports day. I was also never the class representative or anything like that. Oh, I was part of the school lunch committee, but I kind of feel like that's the only thing I did. Also, or not enough. Basically, a really bland kid.
Even though it was herself she was talking about, it kinda sounded like she was describing a classmate that she'd never interacted with.
I think my hair was also shorter back then, and obviously not dyed.
She stated, while gripping her bang. In other words, the same as her little sisters. I kinda wanted to see her with short black hair now.
What about you, Adachi?
I didn't get the feeling she actually cared. It was more like she compelled to ask me since I'd asked her.
Pretty much the same as I am now, I think.
I decided to play it safe and gave the same answer she did. As I did, Shimamura closed her eye before opening her mouth.
Same as now. So, you had the teacher hold your hand?
There was a slightly mean-spirited smirk on her face as she said that. It seemed that after all that happened between us, this was what she'd begun seeing me as.
That's not what I'm like, though.
Really? What are you like then?
Let me think.
I'm not some baby who constantly needs attention. That's what I wanted to say, but the moment the words were about to leave my mouth, I was filled with so much embarrassment that I had to stop myself. Furthermore, looking back to it, I was forced to accept that she might actually have been right. After all, I had held her hand, I had made her pat my head. There was no explaining those away.
The type that chooses her company well, I guess.
It only took seconds for me to realize that saying that was basically the same as admitting I only wanted her to pat my head. That hers was the only hand I wanted to hold. It was kinda confessing? No.
Why me then?
She spoke softly, almost as if lost in thought. Her voice sounded muffled, clucked up. Why? That was simple. Because she was Shimamura. I'd once heard someone say that love is a reason in and of itself. I'd also seen it written in a book. Likewise, it was the first thing that came to mind as the explanation here. I found it impossible to lift my hung head. If I were to give her that as an answer, it would be the same as straight up admitting that I was in love with her. I continued groaning to myself as I attempted to make sense of the thought rushing through my head. The fact that Shimamura hadn't spoken a word since only made it worse. Even disregarding the possibility of her changing the topic, having her say anything would be less painful than his silence continuing. I took a deep breath before lifting my head, praying in my mind that this would cause her to speak. What was I greeted by, however, was an expression of complete tranquility on Shimamura's face. Wait a second. Her eyes were closed, and I could also hear snoring softly. I took a closer look. She was sleeping. Had her voice sounded so quiet earlier only because she'd been sleepy? I crawled out from under the kotatsu, careful not to make a sound. I approached her and, for now, kneel next to her. Why? Or rather, what did I mean by "for now"? Timidly, I took a look at her. Her usual sociable smile was gone, replacing by the defenseless expression of someone who was asleep. Simply looking at it could feel myself growing more and more restless. Not only did my eyes jump around awkwardly, my cheek felt like they were on fire as well. I didn't often get to see her in such a vulnerable state. It was as if the wall she had built around her to shield her from other people had turned transparent, and now I was peeing through them. This really felt like something I shouldn't have been doing. At the same time, I found it impossible to take my eyes off her. So what next? I'd come here to study, so maybe I should get back to doing that? No, let's just drop the act already. That had never been my true intention. Anyway, I stared at her. I began to realize what an incredible opportunity that was. Opportunity to do what? Play a prank on her? Before I knew it, my eyes had moved to her lips. I don't know if it was the dryness of winter or what, but they were slightly chapped. I started to touch them, but almost instantly stopped and leaned forward just a little bit. There was no one here. Shimamura was asleep. This was all the checkbox of the imagined scenario in which I might try kissing her. My eyes were spinning, my mind grew increasingly hazy, and my head started to hurt really bad. No. I slammed my fist against my head, telling it to calm down. There was no guarantee that she would stay asleep for the next 24 hours. It would only make her waking up while I was kissing her for it to be all over. Besides, it wasn't like I wanted to kiss her no matter what. Shimamura herself was asking me to do it. Then it would mean a lot, but not so much if she wasn't. There was a word of difference between wanting to kiss someone and being asked for asked for a kiss. What I wanted was a latter. How the kiss came to happen, it mattered a lot. While I was busy trying to think it through, Shimamura woke up. Her half-open eyes turned toward me. Was she confused to why I was now sitting next to her? Her body grew stiff, and a moment later. Shimamura gripped my knees. She then dragged her body to me, with my heart pumping like crazy, unable to understand what was happening. Her head landed on my thigh. She adjusted her position before once again closing her eyes.
I like these. So much softer.
She whispered. It seemed that she'd been looking for a pillow.
I see.
I replied, mumbling despite my best attempt to act calm. My cheeks were practically burning, as if the eating element inside the kotatsu had been pressed directly against them.
Are you feeling tired?
I'm not sleeping. I'm wide awake.
It sounded like she had to force each individual word out of her mouth. Still, she wasn't lying. Her eyes were open.
Aren't you cold?
She asked.
No, not at all. I'm fine.
Still lying down.
Oh, right. Wanna wear the hanten?
Still lying down, Shimamura reached for the hanten and held it up, since it would have been rude to decline her offer. Plus, I was actually feeling cold. I thanked her and put it on. I was already slightly difficult to move my body with my uniform on, and with an additional layer on top of it, it would be doubly so. Anyhow, I hadn't gotten the jacket halfway on when I started feeling droplets of sweat dripping down my skin. Was the hanten that effective? Well, not really. It was cold sweat, most likely caused by anxiety.
Shimamura, how do you usually spend Christmas?
My voice cracked slightly in the middle of my question. Either way, I had managed to nonchalantly change the topic to the conversation to Christmas. The expression on Shimamura's face remained just as sleepy as before she turned her head. Her cheeks rubbed against my skin, caused them to swell up slightly. She waited for them to return to normal before answering my question.
We usually get chicken for dinner. Oh, and we eat cake too. No candles though.
That sounds pretty common.
I obviously didn't know the statistic or anything. I just had a feeling that fried chicken from either Moss Burger or KFC, depending on the family. Rarely did you get a chance to eat turkey.
My little sister still gets Christmas presents. She also believes in Santa.
Santa, huh?
Something about that felt awfully nostalgic. Still, did you really need to believe in him to get presents?
How old were you when you stopped believing in Santa, Shimamura?
I never did.
She answered bluntly.
Old men who are that kind-hearted just don't exist.
What does Shimamura ask? Way too of thinking about it. Tolerant, but at the same time, lacking kindness. By the way, weren't we meant to be studying for the exam? Whatever happened to that?
What about you, Adachi?
I honestly thought it was something my preschool's teachers came up with.
Huh? Why?
They were the only adults I ever heard talking about Santa.
He simply wasn't a thing in my family. My mom had just once, asked me what I wanted for Christmas, but since I remained silent, unable to decide, the topic didn't come up the following year. That really sucked. There was so many things that I wanted.
Neither of us really did that sort of kid stuff, huh?
I suppose.
I stated in agreement with her opinion. I kinda wanted to have it. I didn't do it presently either, but decided against it.
Still, they do say childhood is the best time of a person's life. You get to live wild, do dumb things. Probably don't have to worry about stiff shoulders either.
She reminisced, sounding just slightly jealous. Her eyes were once again closed. There was a faint smile on her face. Her head was still in my lap. It was easy to tell she found it comfortable. This all combined to give a certain air of childishness, something that I didn't exactly associate with her. The fact that she was resting her head on my lap probably was the main reason, huh? Either way, most of my nervousness from earlier was gone, and my body temperature had also dropped considerably. From feeling like I had a fever to a suitable level, the touch of her head against my leg felt extremely pleasant, so much that I didn't want to miss the warmth of the kotatsu one bit. It was like we'd taken those days we'd skipped school, taken the relaxation, and left everything else behind. I found myself wishing this would go on forever.
Let's not.
My plan had been to change the topic to Christmas, talk about this and that, and then smoothly invite her. Not today. The next time. Right now, it was all I wanted to do, like a loving mother bird, protecting under its wing.
Bonus chapter. Meat shop. The visitor. A customer came in looking in for miced meat cutlets. As I'd always been taught to live an honest life, I told them that they were on sale at the supermarket on the other side of the road. This, however, earned me a smack on the head by my father. It seemed that even honesty had its limits. Another lesson learned. When was he going to realize that it was a mistake to leave me tending the store? The final exams were just around the corner, yet he was still making me help him. Something about that didn't feel right. Don't get me wrong. Even if he hadn't made me help him, I wouldn't have spent that time studying. No. I was feeling quite tired, and as such, I most likely would have crawled under the kotatsu and simply added it away. Was that why he had done it? Because he's seen my true intentions?
Ah, she came again.
I exclaimed, as I saw a small person slipping through the alley between the bankrupted tobacco store directly in front of us, and the building next to it. A girl with blue hair. She hopped inside, waving both of her hands above her head. This person had started visiting our store regularly some time ago, and these days it was rare for there to be a night that she didn't come by to buy something. And by something, I mean the same thing every time. The girl stood on her tiptoes and lifted 3 of her stubby fingers.
3 croquettes, please.
The usual, huh?
This time, I didn't mention the supermarket. I forwarded the order to my father, who then took the croquettes, deep fried just now, and placed them in a box. I handed the container to the girl, along with the change, and she immediately took out one of them and began eating it on the spot. I could hear her munching as she once again disappeared into the darkness of the alleyway. Seeing how she came to buy croquettes pretty much daily, the only 2 possibilities I could think of were that she was either buying them as a snack or running an errand for her folks. Which one was it? I wonder. Regardless of the frequency of her visits, father clearly still wasn't used to seeing her. His movements grew stiff and awkward whenever she showed up. Oh, and I should mention, this girl apparently appeared to be friends with Hino. She sure had a lot of weird friends, didn't she? Of course, I wasn't one of them. No, I was normal. Mother had finished whatever housework she'd been busy with, and was ready to take my place, and I was told that I could go back. Being the honest person I was, I did just that. Not before extending my neck and looking up the sign above my head, though. Nagafuji meat. That's what was written on it. I'd been commonly referred as Meat Fuji in both elementary and grade school, and that sign was likely to be blamed. Staring at it for too long would get me hungry, which is why I decided to cut it shorter and hurry inside. I exited the store, took off my shoes, and entered the living room. Afternoon was when every last corner of our house was filled with the smell of fried food, and it was already way past that. Though I was personally used to the smell and didn't mind at all. Many of my friends said that they found it unbearable. Speaking of which, one of those aforementioned friends just so happened to be present. She was lying shoulder deep under the kotatsu, watching TV with a bowl of red kidney beans in her hand, not even bothering to get up. She turned towards me before sticking out a now empty styrofoam container, shamelessly asking for more, with her eyes and her wide grin.
Seconds!
Go home.
I brushed her demand aside and placed my feet under the kotatsu under the other end. Hino once again turned to face the TV. Why was she always at our house? I distinctly remember it having started the very first day of preschool. We'd played together, and before I knew it, she had been over at our place eating croquettes while I had long since forgotten which of us had spoken to the other first. I didn't know that we used to call each other by our given names back then. That or various nicknames derived from them. Anyway, somewhere around the second year of elementary school, we had switched back to our last names. And those were what we'd been using ever since. Hino had been small from the start. Not once had she surpassed my height.
I wonder why you never grow big,
Oh, you're picking a fight?
She placed her hands on her chest, but I simply brushed it off, choosing to stare at her instead. She had always preferred fish to meat. Was that what really set us apart? Fish? Interesting. Still, my mother loved fish, and she was pretty big. Maybe it was motivation. Not that it really mattered whether Hino was big or small. We'd been walking side by side regardless, and as such, there was no need to look for an answer. Speaking of which, I know it's been years, but I just realized that she told me her first name almost immediately after we met in preschool. I likely been the first friend she'd ever made, and it had gotten her really happy. That seemed to make sense. Anyway, she'd quickly grown used to the smell of fried food, though I wasn't exactly grateful for that. After all, it meant not being able to read the atmosphere.
Hino, did you forget my first name?
I knew it! You do think I'm an idiot!
She sat up, with her jaw resting against the table part of the kotatsu. She stared at me. It was common for her to misinterpret my statement and take them that way. Incidentally, I was at times treated like an idiot myself. I wonder why that was.
That reminds me.
I'd remember something while thinking about the past. How nostalgic. Still, thinking about it, was there something more to it? Alright, let's try it out.
Hino, come here.
I got out from under the kotatsu and beckoned her to me. While at it, I took off my glasses. After all, I hadn't worn them back then.
Huh? What? Are you going to give me something?
Yep, I am.
Ooh, really?
She immediately pulled herself out from under the kotatsu and crawled next to me. Most likely she was hoping for a second serving of red beans or something. What an utterly hopeless person, I thought as I reached for her brow.
Oh.
I brushed her hair aside and placed my lips on her tiny forehead. It was just as hard as back then. Also, I felt slightly cold. Well, it was winter, I suppose. For a moment, Hino sat there, frozen in place, but as I began moving my tongue against her skin, she quickly bent her body and distanced herself from me. A hand once again pressed against her forehead, but this time it was her own. She was clearly flustered. Not quite the same reaction as back then. No. Back then, she'd kiss me back, shouting, "Revenge!" Looking back to it, it felt like we'd spent entire days doing that.
Yeah! What are you doing?
I just remembered how we used to do this all the time when we were kids.
We did? Oh, I guess.
Her eyes jumped around, and it was hard to tell what sort of expression she was trying to show on her face.
Still, the past is the past. We aren't kids anymore.
Has something changed?
I asked. Hino remained silent. Her eyes moved slowly from left to right, after which she dropped her shoulders, as if having lost all of her strength.
No, nothing has changed.
That makes two of us then.
With her hands still on her forehead, Hino laughed. Watching her, I felt like I finally understood it. While I might not have been able to read the atmosphere, I could most definitely tell the temperature with my skin.
Chapter 3 Strange Adachi.
When Shima grows up, she'll be the biggest.
That was something I had said when I'd been little. It had been my dream back then. all the other kids used to call me Shima. I'd quite liked the name, and at some point had begun using it myself. It was pretty embarrassing in retrospect. Had I seriously referred to myself in the third person? Ugh. Anyway, one day during senior class of kindergarten, we'd been asked to describe our dreams for the future. That had been my answer to that question. I honestly couldn't remember why I had said it. Were there some tall kids that I'd been looking up to? Not sure. How had I viewed those around me back then? The sky was high up, and adults were tall. I could run as far as I wanted without ever getting exhausted. And if there was ever something I was interested in, I would simply rush over to it. Eating candy didn't bring with it an equal amount of mental anguish, and there were no troublesome relationships to worry about, only friendships. It never ceased to amaze me how carefree my life had been back then, how far I had opened my shell. Adachi had been acting a little strange lately. Sure, she'd always tended to behave suspiciously at times, but this was different. First of all, there had been an increase in the numbers of times when I could feel her staring at me. I'd randomly notice it during class. I'd turn my head and 9 times out of 10 our eyes would meet. As they did, Adachi would immediately hang her head and open her textbook. At least have it open from the beginning, I always wanted to point out. Not that it mattered. Anyway, that was strangeness number 1. Number 2, her lips and shoulders quivered whenever we spoke. Her lower lip would tremble, and her shoulders would do the same, only scaled up. I couldn't help but feel that there was constantly something on her mind, something she wanted to spit out, but couldn't. I guess whatever muscles control your lips don't get sore, huh? Number 3. She'd gotten a better grade on the English final exam than I had. If I were to ever travel overseas, I should definitely take Adachi with me. That was a joke, by the way. There was most likely something that she wanted to tell me or ask me. On one hand, I thought it would be best to ease her into it by asking her if there was something that she wanted to ask me. But on the other, I wasn't sure what I would do if it turned out to be something really heavy. Seeing how much trouble she was having saying it, there was a real chance that might happen. For example, what if she wanted to borrow money? Or ask for a little sister? The thought of those examples were completely improbable. They still highlighted what I was afraid of. Her approaching me with something where my first reaction would be, "Why are you asking me?" That was why I had decided to stay silent for now. Still, after 3 straight days of pretending not to notice, I was quickly reaching my limit. The lunch break was after this lesson, and I decided that I would bring it up while we were eating. At times like these, the thing you were worrying about tended not to be nearly as serious as it seemed to be in your head. Of course, that was just how it had been for me personally, and the actual statistics may have been far different. Regardless, I decided to trust my experience. It gave me hope, if nothing else. Japanese history class came to an end, and the atmosphere in the classroom instantly relaxed. We'd gotten back the last of our final exams, and regardless of how well you had done or how bad, they were now over. This meant that you could finally stop stressing about them and simply focus on waiting for both the end of term ceremony and the winter break. Despite it being quite cold, cheerful voices flew about the room, like small torches banding together on a stormy night. Some people were laughing at the horrible grades they'd gotten. There were also girls talking about all the things they were going to do with their boyfriends during Christmas. Christmas, huh? Just 10 more days and a bearded old man would show up. Much like last year, my little sister would once again receive Christmas presents from Santa. It seemed that she still believed in him. As we slept in the same room, she could see that I didn't receive any, leading her to triumphantly proclaiming,
You've been a bad girl, sis.
every single year. If anything, I felt like I was a good big sister for letting her get away with that without punishment. But I digress. Brushing that matter aside, I pushed my textbooks into the drawer of my desk and got up with my wallet in hand. I glanced at Hino and Nagafuji, opening their bento boxes, and then Adachi, propping her chin up with her hand and staring off into the distance. I stared at her for a while, yet she didn't notice me, leading me to assume that she was lost in thought. The fact that she hadn't put her books away yet further supported this theory. It felt like a waste to simply call out to her. Yes, such inattentiveness needed to be punished. I circled behind her and placed my chin on top of her head. As I did, Adachi instinctively jumped up, causing her skull to hit quite hard against my jaw. My surprise attack seemed to have utterly shocked Adachi, so much so that she quite literally fell off her chair. With her hands on the floor, she hurriedly turned to face me, staring up at me with frightened eyes as I rubbed my sore chin. I'd ended up biting my tongue, and as a result, my eyes were a tiny bit moist with tears.
It was you, huh, Shimamura? Ha. You almost gave me a heart attack.
Adachi said while clenching at her chest through her clothes. Even so, I could see the tension on her face relaxing. She might have been scared really badly, but it seemed that knowing who the other person was had helped her calm down. Or so you'd think, at least. Her eyes were darting around way faster than they had been mere seconds ago.
So, what are you doing?
Just having some fun. Ouch.
It hadn't been all that long since my little sister had headbutted my jaw, and here I was, making the same mistake again. Did I not learn? Either way, I took Adachi's hand and helped her up. The way she'd fallen had been quite flashy, and as such, the heads of all the students in the classroom were now turned towards us. Adachi was visibly uncomfortable. It seemed that she had noticed it as well. Well, first things first, I should take her outside. This was at least partly my fault after all. Conveniently, as I'd helped her onto her feet, we were holding hands. Pulling her along, I exited to the hallway.
What? Huh? What?
Adachi's eyes were spinning, and her cheeks were somewhat red. Perhaps her heart still hadn't calmed down from earlier. I let go of her hand and patted her shoulder, telling her to take a deep breath. Doing as she was told, Adachi leaned against the wall. I could see her chest swelling as she first inhaled, then exhaled. It didn't seem to be too effective, though, at least judging by the fact that her eyes just kept spinning. I decided to leave her breathe for a while. Though her cheeks did seem to grow redder with each breath she took, it was still possible to come up with an explanation for it that didn't make her look like a total loser. Perhaps her breaths were so powerful that their sheer energy was causing her cheeks to grow hot. Cool, right? Regardless, as I stood there in front of her, my hand on her shoulder, I realized just how much taller than me she really was. I'd known that she was, but this much? Don't get me wrong, I didn't feel annoyed by it or anything. This wasn't a competition after all. Still, thinking about a classmate taller than me calling me Big Sis and asking me to pat her head, there was something about it that didn't feel right. Just what on earth was the relationship between us. As the deep breaths didn't seem to be having much effect, I lifted my hand off her shoulder. I started thinking of other ways to help her, but before I could come up with any, Adachi managed to calm down on her own. Her eyes were no longer darting around, and the redness of her cheeks had begun pulling back as well. Perhaps the effects of the breathing were only now starting to kick in. Either way, it seemed that she was finally in a state in which we could have a conversation. Not that any of this would have been necessary if I hadn't done what I had.
No, Arachichi.
I called out to her, imitating Hino as a joke. There was another meaning to it as well. I wanted to start back from square one.
Oh, I want you to say my name normally.
She muttered. I felt like this wasn't the first time she'd asked me that. At the same time, I also felt like it was.
Relax, it's just a one-off nickname. Now then, never mind.
I'd thought about suggesting that we go have lunch, but considering the state my tongue was in after what had just happened, I came to the conclusion that it might have been better to skip it for today. I was reminded of all those times my parents had scolded me for doing stupid things for no reason. I could still taste blood on my tongue. It really wouldn't make for good flavoring.
Lately, I've been thinking that there's something up to with you.
Really?
Yep, I feel like you're staring at me quite often.
As going around in circles seemed like a huge pain, I decided to simply ask her directly. Adachi immediately averted her gaze. Though there was no change in her expression, her eyes were unable to hide the truth.
Oh, am I?
Yep, you are.
I stated conclusively. Adachi's eyes were trying to escape me, but I quickly circled around her and placed myself back in front of them. As I did, she immediately changed direction. I changed direction as well. After about 3 laps around her, I got bored of it and moved on to the next question.
Do you have something that you want to say to me?
Adachi's tightly pursed lips trembled.
I'm not gonna say that. I don't have.
I see. Well then, go ahead. Let's hear it.
I urged her. Though it wasn't like me at all, I was honestly kind of curious to hear what she had to say. Was it a complaint of some kind, perhaps? Seeing how hard of a time she was having saying it, that seemed like the safest guess. Although, if that's what it was, then urging her to say it was kind of weird. With her mouth closed, Adachi began mumbling something. I couldn't hear what she was saying.
Well, the winter, how about next week? No, I mean, in about 10 days.
Continued mumbling incoherently while fidgeting around. It seemed that the majority of her words were getting stuck in her throat. She smacked her chest, as if to force the clog down. It didn't help her calm down, though. No, she was still fidgeting, all over the place. I was reminded of a chicken, running around, trying to build up the speed necessary to start flying. Not that chickens could fly. Anyway, was she really okay? Adachi turned to face me, although it was more of a token gesture considering that her eyes were looking somewhere else entirely. She then spoke.
Can you give me just a little bit more time to build up courage? I'll tell you then. I promise.
Sure, okay.
She'd smacked her chest, and it seemed that her heart had replied that it wasn't ready yet. Well, nothing I could do about that. Or was there? At this point, I was even starting to get worried. What would I do if she were to say something heartbreaking? Wait, was my heart really fragile enough to get broken? Regardless, Adachi's feet scuffed against the floor. It seemed that she was planning to escape. So I gave way, and she actually ran all the way back to the classroom, or rather, jogged. It was around that time that I noticed how much colder in the air the hallway had gotten. My body shivered slightly. Come to think of it, hadn't I had a friend who once fell over from shivering too hard back when I was little? I peered back into my memories, those hazy memories of old. A story from a time when I'd been defenseless. I'd had a friend in kindergarten who I'd gotten along with especially well. The quickest way to describe her was to say that she'd been kind of like Adachi. And no, the punchline wasn't going to be that she'd actually been Adachi. Her name was different. Adachi and I, we weren't bound by destiny or anything. Anyway, I'd been a hyperactive and completely incautious child back then. The only way I'd known was forward. Right behind me, there'd been her. She was like my shadow, inseparable. Thinking about it now, I wonder why she'd been behind me and not next to me. Had she been hiding? Made sense, I supposed. She was awfully afraid of people, after all. I remember seeing her by the gate on the day kindergarten started, clinging to her mother's arm while bawling her eyes out. To this day, I wasn't sure what had motivated me to grab her by the hand and walk with her to the shoe rack. Either way, that was the moment our friendship began. It was strange to think about how, had it been the current me, I likely would have ignored her and missed that chance. I told her my name, leading her to becoming the first person to call me Shima. I vividly remembered the displeased look on her face as the nickname spread and the other girls began using it as well. I could feel a bit of Adachi in that. Though it was definitely the wrong way around, chronologically speaking, as I thought about the past, I found myself substituting that girl with Adachi more and more. Back then, having someone clinging to my back had made me really happy.
We're like an exploration party,
I'd shouted. How stupid. Naturally, I'd been pretentious enough to call myself the leader. Though it might not have seemed like it to others, for me, the kindergarten and the surrounding neighborhood had been an unexplored land, filled with traps. It had been my mission to explore it, chart the uncharted. Small details, such as how there could be traps if the land was unexplored, didn't matter to me. Anyway, I really liked walking around with her. As for the girl, she didn't particularly care for it. No, putting it that way actually was selling it short. There were times when her behavior practically screamed that she hated it. I decided to ignore it, however, prioritizing my own convenience instead. In retrospect, I was being quite selfish. Still, while being a weird approach to take, I had to admit I acted pretty similarly these days as well. It wasn't really something that had changed over time. Girls might not have been assertive by nature, but they were quick to display their interests. And what she liked were marbles, wind chimes, and pretty much everything else shiny. It was only when she spotted one of those things that she would come out from behind me and sprint towards them, making me the one chasing after her. It didn't really make a lot of sense in retrospect, but I remembered always getting mad that she didn't find me shiny. Why had I felt that way? At this point, I could no longer tell. It was the same as trying to figure out what went on inside of the head of another person. That was to say, extremely difficult. Anyway, We eventually entered elementary school and, after being placed in different classes, stopped seeing each other altogether. It wasn't like we'd had a fight or anything. No, we just felt like the distance between us had grown too great to maintain our friendship. Or rather, I'd felt. It had been mainly me. Rumors say that she turned into a delinquent after entering middle school, and not a fake one like me and Adachi, but a real delinquent. I couldn't help but wonder, what sort of a shiny thing had she spotted that had caused her to veer off the right path? Lying collapsed over the kitchen table, I did my best to fight against the urge to fall asleep.
What part of that do you call fighting?
Mom said as she forced me awake by smacking me on the head. Falling asleep and waking up were both things that I always had trouble with during the winter season. Maybe it was my body's way of telling me that it was time to hibernate. I thought as I shivered with cold. Though the kitchen was relatively warm thanks to the heater, every now and then a gust of chilly air managed to make its way inside my pajamas. I decided to kill some time by using my fingers to erase the fog stain my cheek had left on the table. As I was doing that, my breakfast arrived. Chopped fish with bell peppers and cod roe on top of noodles, plus some sprinkled rice on the side. Leftovers from yesterday's dinner. Dad wanted to keep the circumference of his waist in check as we headed towards New Year's holidays, meaning that we were all going to be eating lighter meals from now on. Everyone was more or less fine with that, except for my little sister, who had no concept of being on a diet. Speaking of her, she had already finished eating breakfast and had even brushed her teeth, meaning that she was just about ready to leave for school. They were having a morning marathon, whatever that meant. Just hearing those words made me gag a little. It was honestly pretty incredible of her to be able to leave the house with her head held high, even though she knew that was what awaited her.
It's a stellar, and she's early. Got nothing but good things to say about it.
You could learn something from her. Stop chewing your food and swallow already. I want to get these dishes down.
Giving the dishwasher a smack. She'd always taught me to chew well when I was little, and now she was telling me the opposite. You really needed to take what your parents told you with a pinch of salt, huh? Meanwhile, my little sister poked her head through the doorway, wearing the yellow hat that kids her age wore on their way to school.
I'll be going now. Take care.
After saying bye to Mom, she turned towards me and grinned triumphantly.
You should head to school soon too, big sis.
Shut up. Once you're a high schooler, you can wait till the sun has risen completely to go to school.
Who taught you that? It's absolutely not true. You're 3 years early.
Mom once again smacked me. Ow! What was meant to be a hard rebuttal only made my sister giggle. She then left. I could hear Mom groaning as she stared at an empty piece of paper. She was writing a shopping list to tell her what to buy from the supermarket later this evening, but seemed to be having a hard time from the looks of it. She placed the pen she'd been holding onto the table and sighed.
It's such a pain to have to come up with dinner every day.
I can imagine. Good luck.
Do you have anything you'd like to eat?
Often asked me for suggestions, but hardly ever went with them. Most of the time, she came out from the supermarket with something completely other than what she'd had in mind going in. That made it really hard for me to put any sort of serious thought into my suggestions.
Curvy will be fine, I guess.
What about something from the deli counter at the meat shop? Would you like that?
Do as you please.
A pointless exchange. I wonder if she meant the store that Nagafuji's family owned. I'd heard that they'd started putting her behind the counter from time to time. I wonder, did she do a good job?
Big sis, big sis!
Suddenly, my sister rushed back inside. My first guess had been that she'd forgotten her lunch bag or something, though that theory was quickly debunked by her addressing me instead of Mom. She entered the kitchen and looked at me. Though she hadn't been outside all that long, the touch of cold air had already turned the tip of her nose red.
Your friend came.
Really wasn't something that I'd been expecting her to say. Not in this day and age. It took me a second to even process her words.
Little by little, I was able to digest them, and their meaning became clear to me.
Friend?
While asking who would have sounded less weird, I was too shocked to think of that in the moment.
Where?
Outside!
She pointed towards the entrance. Very helpful. I now knew that they weren't inside. Anyway, she probably meant in front of our house, right?
Do you know who it is?
Yep, the golem came by the other day.
The other day. Wait, Adachi?
Why had Adachi walked past the school and come here? Could it be that she'd accidentally gone the wrong way? I didn't really see her as someone who would do that. Regardless, knowing Adachi, she was likely waiting for me. I decided to go see what's up. I placed my chopsticks and bowl on the table and left the kitchen. My sister was hiding behind my back. Having forgotten my slippers in the kitchen, I stepped on the cold hallway floor with my bare feet. Ugh. I could practically hear the sound of vapor forming as the warm air that had surrounded me just moments earlier cooled down in mere seconds. The way it clung to my skin felt really cold and gross. Ooh. Hunched up, I opened the door and stepped outside. Just like my sister had said, Adachi was there. She sat on her blue bike, looking like she'd come to pick me up. She was dressed in school uniform, and her bag was also placed inside the bike's basket. It didn't take long for her to notice me. Awkwardly, she approached me, still on her bike. You could see groups of elementary school students walking to school passing in front of our house. As we live along a school road, it was always super crowded at this time of day. Annoyingly so, according to my parents, who both had to walk past them each morning. Anyway, Adachi was still trying to make her way towards me. With her head hung, she gave me multiple glances. There was clearly something in her mind.
I wonder what brings her here. Some emergency? No, probably not.
Trying to come up with an explanation for Adachi's sudden appearance, I look over my shoulder at my little sister, staring at me from quite a distance away, and wave at her to go to school. She turned around a couple of times, but ultimately waved me goodbye before merging into the stream of elementary schoolers. Now that was done, I pulled back my hand, but not before waving at my little sister. Well, my second one, and this one is temporary. Adachi had finally managed to make her way towards me, and was now standing before me. Her hand was ever so slightly raised. It seemed that she'd been waving at my little sister as well. How Adachi like?
Yo, Adachi.
Hello. I mean, good morning.
Why are you speaking like that?
There was something strange about the way she had spoken those words. Like, she was emphasizing the latter halves way too much. I've never met with Adachi this early in the morning, and as such, seeing her in light of the morning sun felt fresh in a way. Whereas Adachi's hair was combed and straight, mine was all messy like I'd just gotten out of bed. And while she was dressed in her uniform, I was still wearing my pajamas. Well, whatever, I thought to myself as I rubbed my eyes. A thought did cross my mind to make her wait outside for 10 minutes while I got myself ready. But considering the season, it seemed a little harsh. Regardless, I did get the feeling that if Adachi were in my shoes, she would definitely have made me wait.
So, what is it? Aren't you a little early? What time did you arrive?
I showered her with questions. White vapor came out of Adachi's mouth as she tried desperately not to look into my eyes.
I have something I want to talk to you about. I thought the morning would be a good time to do it, and I just got here.
She answered all of my questions, one by one. She'd done so with the whole sit-up thing as well. Deep down, she was a pretty conscientious person, huh? I did find myself questioning that last bit, though. Was she really speaking the truth? Well, not that it mattered to me if she wasn't. I placed my hand on her cheek to test it out. I was a little taken aback by how much her eyes jolted as my hand came into contact with her, but regardless, I was able to check the temperature of her skin. It was colder than mine. Way colder. Not that proved anything. Her house was quite a distance away from ours, and I could easily imagine her getting this cold while biking here. I checked her nose and her cheeks as well. They were bright red, as if she was hiding red gingers inside them. No matter how much extra clothing you wore, the cold would always get to you. More importantly, I was getting cold as well. Far too cold to stay outside. I grabbed Adachi by the wrist.
It's cold out here. Let's go talk inside.
Hey!
I pulled her off her bike and, after letting her park in the garage, dragged her inside. She'd grown far less resistant and confused than she'd been initially, and took off her shoes without much trouble. We entered the hallway, and for a second I wondered where we should go before remembering that I'd been in the middle of eating breakfast, and that I should probably finish it.
Sorry to intrude.
Welcome in.
I replied to Adachi's whimper as I entered the kitchen.
I'm...
Good morning. Okay. Oh my, a friend?
Mom had been sitting lazily with her feet pointed towards the ceiling, but the moment she noticed that I was with someone, she sprung up.
Sorry to intrude.
Adachi repeated and bowed slightly.
Oh no, it's nothing. Welcome in.
Mom replied to her, using the exact same words I had just moments earlier. It really wasn't funny. I closed the door and sat down on my usual chair. Adachi was looking like a little lost, standing in the doorway. So I urged her to sit down on the chair my little sister always used. She put her bag aside and did just that. There I was, sitting on the kitchen with Adachi. Yeah, nothing about this felt right. Adachi seemed to feel that way too. She was all bunched up, as if she had physically grown smaller. The only person who looked like they were enjoying this was Mom.
Adachi, could you help her eat her breakfast? My daughter is awfully slow.
You don't need to talk, Mom.
I shoved my mouth full of bell peppers and rice, trying to finish my bowl as fast as possible so that I could go to my room.
No, sorry. I already ate before I left.
There wasn't a need to reply honestly, but being herself, Adachi did so anyway.
I see. What did you eat? Something delicious?
Why was Mom giving her such a hard time? While I recognized that it as just another one of her stupid jokes, Adachi didn't. She was clearly being put off by her behavior.
A slice of bread.
She answered while taking off her muffler. I usually preferred my bread in a roll form, but it seemed that Adachi was more of a slice type of person. Still, just a single slice? That wasn't a whole lot. What else did she have? A single glass of water? With those sorts of eating habits, she might eventually turn into a plan. Then again, being able to turn sunlight into nutrition would have saved you some serious money since you'd never have to buy lunch. That reminded me, now that I'd started attending class regularly, wouldn't it be better for me to bring my own lunch? There were some empty lunch boxes on the shelf.
Doesn't your mother tell you that you need to eat more? No, what am I asking? Of course she does. That's what mothers are like. Always worried that their daughters will get too self-conscious about their waist and start eating less and less. Only when you're slightly fat will they feel relaxed.
Mom said before glancing at me. For some reason, whether she was looking at me with the diet or slightly fat, part of mine vastly changed the meaning behind her stare. I wanted to say something, but the massive bite I've taken earlier had filled my mouth with so much food that my voice wouldn't come out. Thankfully, I didn't have to as Adachi opened her mouth after glancing quickly down at her stomach.
She doesn't. She's pretty much never home, so she hardly says anything to me.
She spoke, completely dispassionately.
Oh, I see.
Mom stated before leaning back, having perhaps read past her words. It didn't seem like Adachi's relationship with her mother had changed in a meaningful manner. It would have been quite the dramatic turn of events if our earlier exchange had managed to change her as a person. But as it turned out, our daily lives were far too ordinary for something like that to happen. My grades also hadn't gotten better overnight. If you weren't able to climb onto the back of something far greater than yourself and be carried to the distance, then your only choice was to walk there with your own 2 feet. That applied even if you had started later than other people and had already missed the boat. All 3 of us remained silent as I ate. Once I was done, I quickly left the kitchen. Adachi practically jumped off her chair as well and followed after me. The way she returned the chair back to its place after standing up reminded me of my sister, and caused me to feel emotions I wasn't quite sure how to interpret.
Now make sure to go to school, okay? Not skipping class.
Yeah, I'll go. You don't need to say it so many times.
Paying barely any attention to my reply to her, I headed deeper inside the house towards my room. I took a look behind me and saw Adachi grinning to herself.
What's so funny?
I asked her. I could pretty much guess the answer already, but decided to ask anyway just to be mean.
No, nothing.
She replied, still smiling. I entered my room. I'd left the curtains open, but it was still quite cold in there. The temperature didn't match the overbearing amount of sunlight shining in through the window at all. After a few seconds of thinking about it, I decided to turn the heater on. I wouldn't get to take that long for a break anyway. And though there was a chance that it might cause me to hesitate when it came time to head out, the fact that I had a guest meant that it would have been a little rude not to. I sat down on my folded futon and tossed Adachi a yellow cushion. Though the sunlight coming through the window did warm up my back slightly, my front side was still freezing, causing my body to shiver uncontrollably. Adachi had been rewrapping the muffler around her neck. I could see her eyes looking all over the room. Not that the room has changed since the last time she'd been here. Still as boring as ever.
So, you wanted to talk about something? Wait, is this the thing from yesterday?
Right. She'd had something that she wanted to talk to me about yesterday, but had backed off, saying that she needed more time. Had she managed to get her thoughts in order overnight? Fiddling with her hair, Adachi lifted her head, clearly doing something only because I had urged her to speak. Her eyes, staring fixed at me, were slightly red, and her face looked quite pale as well. It didn't seem like she'd gotten a lot of sleep last night. Could it be? Had she spent the entire night anguishing over this? I was starting to feel more and more guilty.
Shimamura,
Yeah?
would you like to go out somewhere? Or something?
That was as far as she got before averting her eyes.
Sure.
I nodded. In my heart, however, I found myself puzzled. Was that really it? Was that what she'd spent days anguishing over? It didn't seem to me like something that needed all that much thought, or any at all. In the end, no insults had been hurled my way, no dissatisfactions. How anticlimactic. Also, if this was all she wanted to ask, could she have done so in school? Or just texted me or something? Was it really necessary to come all the way to my house? I could neither make head nor tail of Adachi. Not that I'd ever understood her all that well.
Sure. I don't mind. You mean like after school? Or wait, are you saying we should skip school entirely?
Oh, no, not today.
I see.
Adachi straightened her back and sat on her soles. I found myself compelled to pull in my own legs that had been lying on the floor loosely. She squirmed around restlessly as she placed her hands on her knees. How could saying when she wanted to go out with me possibly be that difficult? I waited there patiently, scratching my feet. With her head hung, Adachi at last opened her mouth.
I was thinking around the 25th of this month.
She said, her face bright red.
The 25th, huh?
I didn't get at first why she had specified a date instead of a day of the week. I was so confused that I couldn't help but count forward to see what day it was. Regardless, there was something about her sentence that caught my attention. She'd specifically said, Ob this month. What was special about the 25th of December? Oh. Seconds later, it hit me, and I found myself staring at her with wide open eyes.
The 25th, that...
Yup.
Adachi nodded while drawing her neck in. The lower half of her face had disappeared completely behind the muffler.
Christmas, huh?
It is.
She nodded again. Her body was stiff, giving off the vibe that she was super nervous. That confirmed it. There really was a meaning behind her specifying a date. Huh? A meaning? She was inviting me out on Christmas. The implications here were deep. As deep as the shade of red on Adachi's face. It couldn't be that she wanted to go on a Christmas date with me or something, right? That'd be really out there. Then again, in an establishment such as ours, it was pretty strange for any reason to go out on Christmas to arise. I closed my eyes. I needed to choose my words carefully here. My first instinct was to ask her, Why? But as I thought about it more, I got the feeling that it would bend the spinal cord of our relationship in half, resulting in an injury that would need a lot of time and effort to heal. It really was a cold thing to say, wasn't it? I had to pick something else. Something else. A pair of girls going out on a Christmas seemed like quite an uncommon occurrence. Not that I could say for sure. I'd barely gone outside the previous years, much less downtown. Regardless of the facts, I could now see why it had been so difficult for Adachi to say it, and why she had needed multiple days to mentally prepare herself. Whatever her intentions were didn't change the fact that it was an extremely bold proposition to make. What was she thinking? A hazy mass I was unable to shake off weighed down on my shoulders. It was different from what I'd been anticipating, but just as heavy, if not heavier. Adachi remained motionless with her head hung, almost like she was reflecting on what she'd just said, offering me no further explanation. She'd asked me a question and was now waiting for a reply. I admit, it did make sense. But still, if why was out of question, then what should I ask her? Thinking about it that way, it didn't take long for me to arrive at the next matter. What would we do on Christmas?
Where do you want to go?
No, I haven't thought about that yet.
She spoke quickly.
What do you want to do?
Again, I haven't thought about that yet.
She spoke even faster this time. The increase was so drastic that I felt like if we keep going, we'd eventually break the speed of sound. This is hopeless.
I was just wondering, what you think?
Her head still hung. I could still see Adachi taking quick peeks at me to check how I was reacting. The heater had at last come on, though it wasn't really needed anymore. There was no room in my head to be thinking about feeling cold, and I could only assume that it was the same for Adachi. The sunlight roasting my back grew stronger, then weaker as the sun disappeared and came out from behind clouds. This confirmed that time was flowing as smoothly as ever. Even though judging by this room alone, you could have sworn that it had stopped. There was a chance that Adachi... I was having a hard time finding the words to complete my thoughts. It was the first time ever I had struggled this way. There was a chance that Adachi wanted to know what Christmas was like because she had never experienced it with her family. With that in mind, she'd ask me, her only friend, probably, to go somewhere with her. Was that an interpretation I could be satisfied with? I admit, it was strange to simply make up what's going on in the head of another person, but at the same time, I couldn't risk facing the truth in case it turned out to be something that I was unable to come to terms with. You didn't have to look any further than Adachi's behavior, the shade of red covering her entire face, to see why I was worried. Worried that there might be something more to this. Really, if there was ever a situation fit for a confession of love, this was it. I love you. Something like that. If that happened, I'd panic pretty hard, wouldn't I? Yeah, no doubt about it. A forced smile appeared on my face. In retrospect, it might not have been the greatest of ideas to force her to talk. I really should have waited until after the 25th. But then again, it wasn't like I could see the future. Regardless, I'd now painted myself in a corner. I knew I had to say something, but no words would come out of my mouth. Adachi had begun lifting her legs, giving off the impression that what she was getting to is that she's getting ready to run away. Not on my watch. You reap what you sow. She looked me in the eyes and, perhaps influenced by my stare, began explaining, sounding almost apologetic.
It's not a big deal or anything. It's not. I just want to go out with someone on Christmas on a busy day and see what it was like.
That was it? She wanted to be with someone? It seemed that I'd been surprisingly close to the bullseye with my assumption. Of course, that was only if Adachi was speaking the truth. No, it wasn't good to doubt your friends, especially at times when it was more convenient to believe them. Anyway, while it did seem like the kind of thing you were meant to ask your family for help with, I could understand why someone my age wouldn't want to do that, especially when considering Adachi's family situation. With no other friends to speak of, she'd come to me. It was a simple process of elimination. I felt relieved. Relieved that Adachi didn't yearn for me, but for another person. As long as that was her reason, I had no problem accepting her proposal.
I do need to be home before dinner, but if that's okay, then sure.
Adachi's back straightened in an instant. She heard my reply. Her eyes turned to face me.
For real?
Yep, as long as you take care of coming up with where we're going and all that stuff.
Our family always ate dinner together, and I had the feeling that my sister would miss me if I wasn't there. Of course, that was all going to change in just 2 or 3 years. She'd be fine with her big sister not being present, and even in Christmas itself wouldn't excite her anymore. Regardless, it felt kinda uncomfortable to interpret the situation as Adachi feeling the same way about Christmas as my little sister did currently, having the same thirst for it. Yeah, that was probably it. Adachi, on the other hand, was shaking left to right. She seemed beside herself with joy. It was like she was a dog wagging its tail. Or rather, like her entire body had turned into a tail. It flapped around, rocked from side to side. She'd been motionless for a while, but had again started moving, as if weights holding her down had been taken off. Her expression seemed much brighter as well, and her face practically shone, almost like there'd been a layer of smoke covering it that had melted off. I wouldn't have been surprised to see her have tears flowing down her cheek, as had she not noticed and decided not to wipe her wet eyes. Seeing her so incredibly delighted once again caused me to grow suspicious. No, stop. I shook those thoughts away. Sitting on top of the futon and staring down at Adachi as she wagged her tail, she did kinda seem like a faithful dog.
Adachi Inu.
Somehow, it felt like a dog breed that could really exist. With those sort of wordless thoughts filling my mind, I glanced at the clock. I'd soon have to leave school. Assuming Adachi was willing to give me a ride on her bicycle, that would give me a bit more time, but it also left me with another thing to worry about. With the way she was today, would it really be safe to let Adachi drive? It was obvious at glance that she was on cloud 9, and I was genuinely worried that she might forget to check the traffic lights. Her body had begun trembling. Her lips had turned soft and spongy, while I had in the past felt like pulling her cheeks, playing with her lips. That wasn't something I felt a desire to do often.
Oh?
Suddenly, Adachi sprang up. It was as if a volcano had erupted, a mental image fitting the color of her face.
I gotta go to school.
she exclaimed while her eyes and tongue flicked restlessly. It really sounded like something a straight-A student would say. Her right arm extended, as if pointing towards the clock, and while that was fine and all that lay in front of it was my sister's writing desk.
Huh? Yeah, let's go.
Hurry! I need to hurry! Hurry!
She was stuttering like crazy, yet no such hesitation was seen in her limbs. If anything, they were moving a little too steadily, almost as if they were sticks. Walking without bending her knees like a giant doll, Adachi headed towards the front door. I could first hear the sound of her putting her shoes on in a rush, and then the sound of the door being slammed open. Was she ever going to not burst out of this room? "Wait for me," I muttered silently in my heart.
Let me ride on the back.
And to think that I'd actually thought that I'd get to relax this morning. I looked over my shoulder and out through the window, only to catch a glimpse of Adachi already pedaling. She was going as fast as she could, almost like she was escaping a crime or something. She'd even stood up off the seat to squeeze out that extra bit of speed. I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking that she was suspicious and assuming that she'd done something wrong. Heck, if I'd been a police officer, I would have probably have ordered her to stop. I was reminded of all those other times when she'd run off and left by herself. I hadn't really committed any mistakes this time. Or that's what I would have liked to say at least. Yet, Adachi hadn't done anything either. The only conclusion I could come to was that the problem lay with me. I've gotten my room all nice and warm, but as Adachi had left the door open, it was now getting colder by the second. It was as if the temperature was pushing me to leave the room and go to school. I closed my eyes and groaned one last time. Well, whatever, I thought to myself, brushing aside all of my problems. Adachi and I. It might have not been fate, but something had been piling up ever since we'd met. And so, I decided to go out with Adachi on Christmas this year. Well, whatever. It wasn't like anything special was going to happen if I stayed at home. No visits from Santa Claus or anything.
Bonus chapter. Meat Shop. The Visitor. Part 2. It wasn't uncommon for the cute mascots of various dailies to cause mixed emotions in me. The adorable little piggy wearing a chef's outfit that the tonkatsu shop had, for example, or the smiling octopus at the takoyaki place.
I mean, you do sell the meat of those things, right? Besides, a mascot needs to have some expression on its face. Or rather, it's kind of difficult to put it in words. Anyway, while it is cute, something about a mascot that doesn't hide the fact that it's also being sold rubs me the wrong way. It's like I'm feeling bad for it, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Wow, Hino, you think about some pretty difficult stuff at times.
Don't put me in the same group as you,
I said while shaking my hand. Nagafuji's eyes moved from left to right, following it, though it was common for people to comment that she looked intelligent. No one had ever praised her for actually being smart. Even on her report card, it had been written that the only mature thing about her was her appearance. That had been quite the harsh thing to write, and Nagafuji's parent had immediately contacted her teacher, leading to a minor scuffle between them. As for Nagafuji herself, well, she'd been too busy enjoying the spring break and playing Mario Kart with me to care.
Right, I understand what you're trying to say, Hino. Now, let's think about the mascot more.
Nuh-uh. No, you don't.
This was how it always went. I'd been talking mostly to myself like I usually did, and as such, the fact that she hadn't been listening hurt my feelings. Having come to Nagafuji's place after school, we were now trying to come up with a cute mascot character. Her family store was going to use it, apparently. I didn't know whose idea it had been originally, but as her parents had asked me to help, I found it quite impossible to say no. Unless I was mistaken, the reason why I had been dragged in was quite simple. Her parents had felt that if they were to leave this task alone to Nagafuji alone, she'd end up making something weird. Well, I couldn't really blame them. It was easy to imagine her with a sea urchin mask on or something, which would really be bad since they ran a meat shop. Even now, she'd drawn a parrot that, to be frank, looked way better than it had any right to. The various colors of pens and stacks of drawing paper lying on the top of the kotatsu kind of made it like we were simply having fun doodling. I was reminded of the past. There's one thing Nagafuji had always loved drawing: hamburgers. That and french fries.
Did you come up with something?
What if we made it like you, but a cow?
Okay, show me.
Wait, huh? She was willing to consider it? Even though I had only meant it as a joke, Nagafuji was now staring closely at the pen I was holding. What was I supposed to do here? Panically and silently, I began drawing, again, as this had been meant to be nothing but a joke. My mind was completely devoid of any actual ideas. The decision of what to draw was left completely to my right hand, and soon enough, Nagafuji's face formed on the paper. I was a little simplistic, sure, but otherwise, not bad.
I've seen this before somewhere.
Nagafuji stated, after staring at it for a while. Did they not have mirrors in her family? Or perhaps she was implying that I was so bad at drawing that she couldn't tell what it was meant to portray. You wouldn't do that to me, would you, Nagafuji? But seriously though, how could she not see me that it was meant to be her when I had literally said as much before I began drawing? Much like usual, Nagafuji's reaction filled me with things that I wanted to say. Was she pretending to be an idiot, or was just actually dumb? We had been in middle school when I had become aware of that there was something slightly strange about her. That her temple wasn't like that of other girls. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't dull or anything. No, she just liked talking about things at her own pace. More so than was reasonable in a way. That was something she had perhaps with another friend of mine who had actually met in high school, Shimamura. Perhaps it was this similarity that had led Shimamura to become friends with us in the first place. Yet, whereas Shimamura did have some parts to her that aligned with other people, Nagafuji had basically none whatsoever, making her quite a difficult person to deal with. Regardless, comparing my masterpiece to her, I could spot one difference. The drawing version of her wasn't wearing glasses. It seemed that from my perspective, her not wearing glasses was the norm.
How old were you again when you started wearing glasses?
6th year in elementary school. At some point, my eyesight just dropped.
Dropped to where? As this was Nagafuji we were talking about, it wouldn't have surprised me at all if she meant that her eyesight had physically fallen off where she'd been rolling in bed and had been crushed under her body, or perhaps she'd yawned and her tears had flushed it out. The fact that these ridiculous and idiotic explanations actually sounded somewhat possible told you a lot about her. Anyhow, if that's how late she'd started using them, then it didn't make sense why I felt the way I did. I spent a long time with glassesless Nagafuji. While she wasn't taking them off, putting them on all the time, I did wonder if she had some sort of rule for it when she did.
So, is this thing supposed to be related to the story in some way?
Oh, right. It's not. Nope. Now, what about this?
I picked up a blue pen and began writing. What formed on the paper was a caricature of a blue-haired girl holding up a steaming croquette with a big smile on her face. She'd been coming in as a customer pretty often lately and had definitely earned quite a bit of attention. And so, in a way, you could argue that she was part of the store. Of course, capturing the actual person and forcing her to pose as a mascot seemed like a far faster way to draw a customer. But that really wasn't an option, was it?
Crockett Girl, huh? Yeah, I think that's good.
Hey, don't you go naming her all by yourself?
Now then, let me give you a reward.
Nagafuji stated, having clearly not been listening to me. Not that I minded. No, I was too happy thinking about the reward I was going to get. Just then, however, I felt a deja vu.
You gonna kiss my forehead again?
What, you don't want me to?
Did Nagafuji really think this as a reward? What a weirdo. Like, she thought getting kissed on the forehead was more valuable than candy or something? Ha ha ha. What a weirdo. Wait. No. I already thought that, and yet I couldn't stop. What a weirdo, indeed.
Alright, well, sure. I'll let you do it.
Letting her do it probably made me a weirdo too. But whatever. I moved out from under the kotatsu and lifted my things. Nagafuji crawled towards me, and just like before, placed her hand on my forehead. Her remaining hand landed on the top of mine, pushing it down against the cold floor. Her face drew closer. The angle made me think that she was about to kiss me on the lips for a second. But she soon changed direction and headed towards my forehead instead. A few moments later, I could feel the touch of her lips. It was there that I noticed that her legs had crawled on top of mine as well. I found myself worried that she might soon collapse on top of me and devour me. That's just how much she was leaning forward. Our bodies grew stiff, hers and mine. It was as if we were both sculptures. All I could see in front of me was Nagafuji's chin. Her pale neck. How long was she going to keep kissing me for? Well, not that it really mattered. It wasn't like if she kept doing it for too many seconds, her lips would get permanently glued to my forehead or anything. Not as far as I knew, at least.
You two sure are good friends, huh?
A voice suddenly called out to us from the side. My shoulders and hips jolted up. My head moved drastically, as well as a result, Nagafuji ended up biting her lip. That's what I assumed happened, at least. Based on the way she cursed in pain as she pulled her head away, Nagafuji's mom stood in the doorway, smiling at us with a mixture of emotions on her face. How embarrassing. Like, mega embarrassing. I tried backing away, but as Nagafuji's hand was still on top of mine, I wasn't able to put all that distance between us. Her mom walked inside the room and turned the TV on, and instantly Nagafuji's eyes turned towards it. Why was she so calm?
Make sure you clean all this stuff up, okay?
She said, looking at the pens and piles of papers lying on the table.
Okay.
Nagafuji replied. Then she turned to face me. There were so many things that I wanted to say to her, to yell to her, but with her mom in the room, I was stuck spinning my gears. They spun and spun, going harder and harder. At last, Nagafuji opened her mouth.
We're good friends, huh?
Yeah, just normal friends.
I replied. In part influenced by embarrassment, I could swear that I saw a hint of disappointment on Nagafuji's face. It's impossible to read a sad word. She took off her glasses before correcting her statement.
Right. Normal. Good friends.
Adding those words together, she turned our close friends into something normal. Tearing them apart seemed like a waste. And so I didn't. What sort of face had Nagafuji been making when she heard me say that? Due to the glasses, I hadn't been able to tell.
And that's